What's up everyone, my name is Mark Hawk and today we're doing a quick side-by-side with the new GoPro Hero Plus Edition up against Sony's HDR-AS200V. Now we're going to put these cameras through a variety of tests. You can use any of the quick links you want to jump to the section you're most interested in. Otherwise sit back and we'll start playing them all. So let's get to it. We're going to start off by taking a look at the battery life between these two cameras. Now the GoPro Hero Plus LCD has a built-in internal battery. That means the battery cannot be removed, and once the battery dies, it's done for the day. But since the battery is built in, it actually is a bigger battery than traditional action cameras have, which gives it an extended battery life of about 2 hours and 24 minutes at 1080p 30 frames a second. The HDR-AS200V actually has a removable battery that can be taken in and out, and it'll give you a battery life of about 1 hour and 44 minutes, so about a 40-minute difference. The Hero Plus LCD though has a really good low battery power saving mode, and the AS200V does turn itself off after a minute. Now what we're going to try to do when we're looking at video quality is we're not going to just try and focus in on things like color difference. We want to see sharpness and clarity differences, differences in depth of field, how certain patterns are handled, such as like a heavy area of shrubs and green if the detail on all the branches is picked out. These are the type of things we're sort of testing for here when we do 1080p 30 frames a second. Now both of these cameras are capable of doing other resolutions, and we will get into that in a little bit, but we're starting off with 1080p at 30 frames a second because this is where the sort of camera's maximum potential should be set to, because the camera doesn't have to strain itself to give us the best results. Things like the quality on the leaves here on the Sony AS200V, we see a really nice sharpness and it's really close to the lens, while the Hero Plus LCD is a little bit softer. Now you also might be wondering why we're comparing the sort of entry-level GoPro Hero Plus LCD up against the AS200V. Both of these cameras retail for roughly the same price, and it is a really good comparison to see what your dollars get you in one area as opposed to another, as we cover things like video and as well as features for both of these cameras. As we zoom into 100% here, take a look at things like depth of field and sharpness on the AS200V. Rocks that are really close to the camera have really good edges. We can see all the speckles on the rocks, and there's a really good contrast. On the Hero Plus LCD, we have things that are a little more washed out and a little softer that are closer to the camera, and as we get a little further out, their sharpnesses sort of start to match. With the AS200V, we have a lot more saturation, a lot more contrast. The Hero Plus LCD, again, you could really see that sort of washed out neutral effect. And you can also see a lot of red sort of in that white. Take a look at things like the mountains in the very far back of this screen. Past the ridgeline you see right ahead of you, you'll see a mountain range in the back there with a lot of sand on top. That's not actually snow. Actually, you know what? I think that's clouds way out in the distance there, and there's that far off ridgeline. We can just see a lot more of that in the AS200V here, as well as the tree that's sort of up close with sort of edge detail. Now the one area you really should be aware of with the HDR-AS200V is its field of view is super wide. So look on the right side of your screen, see how the edges of that screen just sort of curve off into almost a perfect circle. The AS200V has a 170-degree field of view lens like the Hero Plus LCD, but the AS200V actually uses a little bit extra on the sides to kind of give you this sort of super wide angle, but it causes an immense amount of distortion at the side edges of your screen. When you have locked off shots like this, it's not very impactful, but when you're moving the camera around a lot, things that come towards the edge of your screen can get severely distorted with the AS200V. Now the Hero Plus LCD again has a 170-degree field of view, but if you want to do something wider, let's say you're in a confined space, you can actually switch on what's called Super View, which we have here right now. Now it's limited to at 720p resolution, but again, we get that sort of extra field of view on the left and right, and we actually get a little extra field of view on the top and bottom. However, there's a little bit of distortion because we're using this full sort of 4x3 image sensor, and if you kind of watch as we switch back and forth here on the left side of your screen, we're actually sort of squishing in a little bit of the extra on the left and right, and the top and the bottom. But it's really good that we have that little bit of option to play around with that. Both the Hero Plus LCD and the HDR-AS200V are completely waterproof right out of the box, up to a couple feet, actually quite a deep depth. The big difference with the HDR-AS200V is I feel like its waterproof case that it ships with is more for protection, even though it can go a really deep distance. Now the reason for this is because it has a bubble lens on the front of the case, which makes recording underwater extremely blurry to the point where it's almost unusable. You can see here as we zoom into 100%, with the Hero Plus LCD, we have a flat lens on there and everything is really nice and sharp. Having that bubble lens just makes everything really blurry. The Hero Plus is locked into the LCD case, which is going to affect us later when we're doing things like audio recording, but it also sort of protects us from falls and again things like water damage. Now the AS200V, for an optional fee later on, you can actually buy a flat lens for your underwater housing, and this corrects all the problems that you have with the bubble lens. It fixes all of that sort of smudginess, that blurriness that we have with the default case. Now this is going to run you around 30 to 50 bucks extra, and again, Hero Plus on the LCD on the left side of your screen doesn't need any of that, but you can see how much of a big sharpness increase we get. So if you're going to be filming with the AS200V underwater, we're able to see all of these things like particles. Everything's really nice and sharp. It's just a shame the AS200V isn't shipping with a flat lens, because the default lens that it gives you isn't really usable underwater. Again, it's really just meant for protection. Now, the AS200V does have some added modes for underwater that the Hero Plus LCD doesn't have. You can actually change the scene color mode. So before we were filming in scene normal, now we're filming in scene water. You can actually see normal on the bottom right and scene water in the upper right. What it's doing is it's flooding the camera with a little more red. That way the camera tries to balance out the colors a little more correctly. This isn't completely unsimilar from the Hero Plus LCD, where you can actually buy a red filter to put on the front of your camera. I just feel with the AS200V is a little bit easier, and you don't have to spend that extra money, but you are kind of having to spend the extra money if you're doing underwater stuff because of the flat lens case. One of the really cool things that Sony's been messing around with that the Hero line of cameras has never really gotten into is digital stabilization. Now, with the AS200V here on the right side of your screen, we're actually going to limit our field of view a little bit when we enable digital stabilization, and we're actually going to take a slight quality hit. Now, the reason why we're losing some of the field of view is because the camera needs to compensate the shake by adding in parts of the screen on the side and sort of shifting it over left and right and warping it around a little bit. So that's why we have the limited field of view, because basically we're using that extra space to keep everything sort of centered in the middle. Now, it's not going to get rid of like all of your shakes, but think of it as reducing like almost 50 to 60% of your normal shakiness. Things like sort of micro vibrations or handheld shots, things that would normally typically ruin a shot or make watching a shot hard, that's going to be affected here. But you're going to notice, look on the left and right side of your screen, you're going to see some sort of warpiness as the AS200V tries to compensate and keep everything nice and steady. Again, we're also losing some of that field of view and a little bit of quality, but there's no way to do this on the Hero Plus LCD. And also, if you are doing stabilization, highly suggest you do it at 60 frames a second just to avoid motion blur and make it look a lot more legit. Speaking about frames per second, the AS200V is capable of shooting up to 120 frames a second at 720p. Now, the GoPro Hero Plus can actually shoot 60 frames a second at 1080p. The AS200V can do the same resolution as well, but we're really just trying to push it here at its max, and there actually will be a slight quality, well, a major quality dip in the AS200V as it does 120 frames a second. Now, take a look at the Hero Plus LCD and look at the sky. You're going to see a lot of graininess, a lot of noise, and what looks like compression. Now, I'm seeing that on my end with no compression. That's straight out of the camera. What you're seeing on YouTube is not because I've compressed it in a weird way. It's how the camera is handling the dust sort of entering the sky, how it handles like these sort of shades of color that are very similar. The camera, while it's trying to like compress that video for your micro SD card, it's like compressing, and it's having a hard time sort of. It doesn't have enough color information to make a smooth gradiated ramp. Now, we don't see that on the AS200V just because of the way it's handling its compression and its bitrate. We have the AS200V at the highest bitrate possible. Also, if you go back to that last shot we just saw, we actually switched from 60 frames a second. We switched from 120 frames a second to 60 frames a second. Watch on the AS200V how our quality sort of goes from like being really sort of smudgy to really sharp. When you're filming at 60 frames a second with the AS200V, it looks really, really good and really sharp. It's not as good as 30 frames a second, but not super noticeable. But when you switch to 120 frames a second, it takes a huge quality hit. Now, before I mentioned that sort of lens field of view and how that distortion can really make moving shots look really weird, look at our sky in the AS200V. We don't have a way to correct our field of view wide unless we switch to steady shot. Now, this might be nice if we're in a really nice, tight, confined area, but like in situations like this, there's no way for me to correct this. Even if I went into a program later on and tried to undistort the lens here, we end up losing so much of the frame. And if I was making a new version of the AS200, say the AS300V, that would be the first thing I would adjust, is that super wide field of view. At least give me field of view controls or something in a future iteration, because right now, even with future updates, we're 6 months past actually where I shot this video. There's no firmware update that fixes that other than switching to steady shot. And filming with steady shot has its own little issues, because if a steady shot camera is left locked off, it has a tendency to drift to the left or right. So you might just leave it on a tripod, walk away, and while nobody's touching it, as the camera tries to detect motion, it might slip slightly to the left or the right. So we're starting to film in low light here, and the GoPro line of cameras has always had a really appealing color space for sort of sunset conditions. That sort of warmer color space always looks really nice. But again, look at things like the quality here on like such that palm tree. On the Hero Plus, it was kind of smudgy. On the AS200V, we have really nice sharp details and things like clouds. On these sort of ridge lines we have on the distance, even things that are closer to the camera, there's a really good amount of detail. As we zoom into 100% here, just look at things like the window on the CNN building. On the left side of your screen, it's really hard to see those individual vertical lines that run in between those gray lines. But even as we get into lower light on the AS200V, you can see all of those lines really nice. Now with the AS200V, we are blooming out that background to be really bright because the AS200V has a backlit image sensor. So as we get into really dark situations, the AS200V really starts to shine, and we'll go into that in a second, but for now we're going to jump into our audio test section. So I'll just shut up for a few seconds here, and I'll jump right back in a bit. You can hear from that last test, just the Hero+LCD has that very muffled quality. And that's again because we can't remove it from the waterproof housing that it's in. Now for those tests, we took the back door completely off, but if you want to keep a door on the back there just to keep it safe, there is one that actually has open vented holes, so that way you get better audio, and then you could pop on your waterproof door when you're doing things near water. Now the AS200V was not in a case for that test, and it has a built-in stereo microphone on the front. It's really good at capturing audio that it's pointed at, but it's maybe not the best with capturing sort of ambient noise from all around. And while I found the quality of the AS200V to sound really good, it can be a little sharp and staticky at points. I mentioned earlier how the AS200V has a backlit image sensor, and that's what's allowing us to have these really nice low light quality images. The Sony HDR series has by far always been the best action camera when you're filming at night. So if you're looking for a camera that you can use in low light conditions and you're going to be using that quite often, AS200V or any actually HDR line will actually give you better results and very reliable results all around in any condition. The Hero+LCD, you know, it looks okay, but it's very muddy, it's very grainy. We don't see nearly as much detail in the dark as we do with the Plus LCD, but as long as you have some sort of light in the atmosphere, such as street lights and stuff like that, you should be able to get a much, you know, a very readable image. But it's not, like, look at things like the cracks here on the paws of the statue tiger, just the cracks, the detail that we can see with the AS200V is way far and above the Hero+LCD. Even when we're filming in almost completely dark scenarios, such as we are in this little parking lot here, the HDR-AS200V is doing a really good job of just finding that information and boosting it up for us without, I mean, we're getting a ton of grain here on both of these images, but with the AS200V, we're actually able to get a really nice bright image and see a lot of details. We can just see the individual lines here on the pavement itself while we're losing almost all of that in the Hero+LCD. Like, here we are in sort of a park with almost zero light here, and we're still able to get a really nice balanced image with the AS200V. Now, we will get shots that look very yellow in comparison, but look at the Hero+LCD in complete darkness. We're getting that sort of reddish purple tint as it's trying to sort of boost everything up. We have a ton of giant dancing green again as it tries to compensate for the lack of light. Now, like I said, as long as you have some sort of light, the Hero+LCD can do a good job of getting you a viable image. You will have a lot of motion blur if you're in a moving environment, and the same with the AS200V. If you're using this as a dash cam, I would definitely go the AS200V route, but do keep in mind you want to keep that around 30 frames a second, nothing lower and nothing really higher. Anything higher will give you a darker image, anything lower will give you a tremendous amount of motion blur. Now, the GoPro Hero+ LCD, when taking still photography, is using an 8 megapixel image sensor. Now, your photos are going to be in a resolution of 3264 by 2448 at a 4:3 aspect ratio. Now, the HDR-AS200V is going to be using an 8.8 megapixel image sensor, which is actually lower than the AS100V, but when we did some quality comparisons before, the differences weren't that extreme. And that resolution is going to be 3952 by 2224 in a 16 by 9 aspect ratio. Now, one thing I do want to note with the AS200V is if you're using this for time-lapse photos, you're actually not getting full uncompressed photos like you are when you're doing still photography. And you're also going to have a sort of button on the back that we use to take photos. If you're not using a smartphone, actually, it's good to mention right now, both of these cameras can hook up to a smartphone. They both have Wi-Fi out, and you can use your phone to change anything like the settings or take photos like we're seeing here. But the AS200V has a shutter button on the back, so if we push it to take a photo, it takes it almost immediately, which can actually give us a lot of motion blur or a lot of streaking, and it can ruin some otherwise good shots unless you're using the phone app or holding the camera extremely steady to like an over-obsessive amount. You can also download all of these images you're seeing here on the screen in the more information section below this video, and if you found this video somewhere else, head on over to markhawkcam.com or markhawkcam on YouTube to find that link. Anyway, before you go, that's going to wrap up our side-by-side of the GoPro Hero+ LCD up against the Sony HDR-AS200V. Let me know what you thought in the comment section below, and if you found this video useful, please be sure to like and share this video. It helps me bump up higher in the search results, that way more people see this video. And if you're feeling super generous, head on over to my Patreon page on the lower right here. If you're not familiar, Patreon is a way you can support YouTube subscribers by just sort of giving a donation, a one-time donation or monthly donation. A lot of MarkhawkCam is paid for out of my pocket, and all the money you guys donate there will sort of return back into the channel and just make doing this a lot easier. But if you can't spare anything, no sweat. Just again, like and share this video. That will help me out almost equally as much. Anyway, let me know what you thought in the comments section below. I'm MarkhawkCam, and I'll see you all out there. Have a good one, everyone.